Your dog is asleep on the floor right now, or maybe your cat is curled up somewhere nearby. And if you watch them long enough, really watch, something happens. The paws start twitching, the legs pump like they're running. A little sound escapes somewhere between a whimper and a bark. And you've thought it probably 100 times, is that dog dreaming? And then you've probably moved on with your day because, well, what else are you going to do? But here's the thing. That question, that tiny, ordinary, middle of the living room question, is one of the deepest questions in all of science. Because if your dog is dreaming, then your dog has a mind that keeps running even when the body stops. A mind that processes experience. A mind that, while unconscious, is still somewhere, still doing something. And if that's true for a dog, what about a rat? What about a bird? What about an octopus? What about a spider? By the end of this video, you will never look at a sleeping animal the same way again. I promise you that. Let's go. First, let's establish something that sounds obvious but actually isn't for most of scientific history. The idea that animals dream was considered at best a charming fantasy and at worst an embarrassing category error. You weren't supposed to say animals dream. You were supposed to say animals exhibit sleep state motor activity because animals were machines, biological machines, sure, complicated ones, but machines. They didn't experience anything. They just ran their programming. This wasn't fringe thinking. This was the mainstream for centuries, the dominant scientific model, heavily influenced by the French philosopher René Descartes, held that animals were essentially complex automatons. When a dog yelped in pain, that wasn't suffering. That was mechanism. Like the sound of a clock ticking. The dog didn't feel anything. It just reacted. Now look, I want to be fair to this view. Science should be rigorous. Science should be slow. We absolutely should not project human experiences onto every creature that breathes. That's bad science. But here's the problem. We overcorrected massively for decades. The idea that animals have rich inner lives, that there's something it feels like to be a dog or a crow or a rat running a maze was dismissed, called anthropomorphism, called naive. It's almost embarrassing to suggest in serious academic circles. And then the research started coming in. And it changed everything. Let's start with the most famous study in the history of animal sleep research, a study that when you hear it is so straightforward, so almost obvious in hindsight that you can't believe it took us until 2001 to pull it off properly. Matthew Wilson was a neuroscientist at MIT. He was running rats through mazes and recording the electrical activity of their neurons, specifically in the hippocampus, the part of the brain that handles memory and navigation. He was measuring which neurons fired when the rat was at which position in the maze. Normal stuff, routine, and then one day he left the rats hooked up to the recording equipment after they finished running. Just forgot about them for a bit. And while he was sitting at his desk doing paperwork, he started hearing something from the monitors. Familiar patterns. Neural firing sequences he'd already heard that day. The rats were asleep, but their brains were running the maze, not similar to the maze. Not vaguely reminiscent of the maze. The patterns were so precise, so perfectly matched, that Wilson's team could identify exactly where in the maze each sleeping rat was dreaming about. They could tell whether the rat was dreaming about running or standing still. They could trace the rat's imaginary path, step by step, through a maze it had run hours earlier, all from brain recordings made while the animal was completely unconscious. That is not a metaphor. That is not a rough analogy. That is a rat, asleep, its brain rebuilding its day's experience in real time, playing it back, reviewing it, consolidating it, doing in a brain about the size of your thumbnail. Exactly what your brain does when you dream about something that happened to you. Rats dream about their days. And we know this. We have the data. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because rats aren't the only ones doing this. And the species this has been found in next is one that will genuinely surprise you. Zebra finches, small songbirds. Striped little things that you might keep in a cage or see at a pet store. And absolutely not think of as scientific revelations. But they are. Here's what researchers at the University of Chicago discovered. Young zebra finches learn their songs by listening to adults. They spend weeks practicing, trying to match what they've heard. Standard bird behavior? But then the researchers looked at what happens to those birds at night while they sleep. They placed electrodes on the tiny birds to monitor brain activity in the regions responsible for song production. And what they found was extraordinary. The birds were singing in their sleep, not out loud. They weren't pushing enough air through their throats to make actual sound. But the neurons in their song production circuits were firing in perfect sequence. The exact same sequence as when the birds sang while awake. Silent, invisible, nocturnal rehearsal. It bolted, and here's the beautiful part. Sometimes the birds didn't just replay the song, they varied it slightly, changed the tempo, tried different notes, as if in the dream the bird was improvising, practicing a new version, working something out. The vocal cords were even moving. To a sleeping bird on its perch, in the dark, mouthing a song that only its dreaming brain could hear. Researchers now believe that this nighttime rehearsal is actually part of how birds learn to sing, that the dream isn't a side effect of the day's activities. The dream is the work. The dream is part of the process by which a young finch goes from a student copying its parent to a bird with its own perfected song. Sleep, it turns out, isn't just rest for many animals. Sleep might be where the real learning happens. Now, let's pause here and address something important, because some of you are going to ask, and it's a fair question, fine. Rats replay mazes, and birds replay songs. That's just pattern repetition in the hippocampus. That's memory consolidation. That doesn't necessarily mean they're experiencing anything. It doesn't prove there's anyone home. Maybe it's just the brain doing maintenance. Running a defrag. Nothing felt, nothing seen. That's a legitimate scientific concern, and it's exactly the right question to ask. But here's where it gets complicated and fascinating and honestly difficult to dismiss. Let me tell you about what happens when you remove the brakes. In the 1960s, a French neuroscientist named Michel Jouvet was doing sleep research on cats. He discovered that during REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, the phase most associated with dreaming, a structure in the brainstem called the pons sends a signal that essentially paralyzes the muscles. It's a safety mechanism. It keeps the sleeping body still so that whatever the dreaming brain is doing doesn't physically happen. It keeps you from acting out your dreams. Jouvet wanted to see what would happen if he disabled that mechanism. So he did surgically. In cats, what followed was one of the most dramatic demonstrations in the history of neuroscience. The cats, still electrically asleep according to every brain measurement, still showing the brainwave patterns of deep REM sleep, began to move. They raised their heads, they stalked, they pounced, they appeared to hiss at things that weren't there. Some arched their backs like they were facing off with an opponent. Some crouched low and crept forward the way a cat creeps when it's approaching prey. 1 minute they'd be still, the next they'd explode into a hunting sequence, then collapse again. All while their brains showed no sign of waking. The cats were acting out their dreams. Dreams of hunting, dreams of fighting, dreams of being cats. Bolted, and the content of those dreams, decoded through their behavior, was unmistakably about something, not random noise, not system maintenance, a narrative, a scenario, a world the sleeping cat was inhabiting. That is not nothing. That is something. That is something that deserves a name. We haven't quite settled on yet. Now, let's get to the case that stops everyone cold. The one that made me sit back from my desk and just stare at the ceiling for a while, because we've been talking about mammals, about birds, animals with complex brains, animals we feel a certain kinship with. Animals, we're not shocked to discover, have inner lives. But what happens when you go further out? What happens when you push into territory where nothing like this should be possible? Let me tell you about the octopus. An octopus has no spine. It has no skeleton at all. Its neurons are distributed throughout its 8 arms. About 2/3 of its nervous system lives in its limbs, not its brain. Each arm is capable of semi-independent decision-making. It can taste and smell and feel simultaneously through suckers that are among the most sensitive tactile organs on Earth. Its brain, such as it is, evolved completely separately from vertebrate brains along a completely different evolutionary path. We last shared a common ancestor with octopuses about 600 million years ago. For context, that's roughly 3 times as long ago as when fish first crawled onto land. And in 2021, researchers in Brazil published a study on octopus sleep cycles that wrote what we thought we knew. They filmed a species called Octopus insularis over long periods of sleep. What they found was that octopuses cycle between 2 distinct sleep states. One is quiet sleep, still pale, unresponsive. The other is active sleep, and during active sleep, something happens that makes you stop breathing a little. The octopus's skin comes alive, colors ripple across its body in rapid dynamic sequences. It shifts from pale to brown to mottled to camouflage patterns and back all in seconds, cycling through a kind of visual symphony, while its body remains otherwise still. Its arms twitch, its eyes dart beneath closed lids, its breathing changes. And when researchers measured its brain activity during this phase, they found that it closely resembled the neural activity recorded when the octopus was actively awake. The research team put it carefully: if octopuses dream, those dreams are probably not like ours. Given the short duration of their active sleep cycles, typically 30 seconds to a minute, they suggested the dreams might be more like short video clips. Quick, vivid flashes of experience. Little gifs of octopus life. But here's the part that really got me. One octopus, caught on camera at an aquarium, appeared to be having something that looked disturbingly like a nightmare. It thrashed. Its colors went wild. It shot a cloud of ink into the water around it. The octopus's defensive response deployed against an invisible threat during what appeared to be a dream about being attacked, an octopus having a nightmare about a predator. That wasn't there. 600 million years of separate evolution, a brain built on a completely different blueprint, and it's still doing something that looks like this. Then there are the spiders. And I want you to stay with me here, because this one is the most recent and I think the most astonishing. In 2022, a behavioral ecologist named Daniela Roessler at the University of Konstanz in Germany was setting up a completely unrelated experiment on jumping spiders when she noticed something strange happening at night. The spiders, hanging from fine silk threads in their enclosures, were mostly still. But periodically, their legs would curl and twitch, and when Roessler looked closer, she could see something even stranger. Jumping spiders, unlike most spiders, have movable eyes, internal retinal tubes that shift to direct their gaze. And in young spiders, whose exoskeletons are still partially transparent, you can actually see those retinal tubes moving. You can watch the eyes shift through the translucent skin of a sleeping spider. Roessler started filming them at night with an infrared camera, and what she saw was unmistakable. Regular rhythmic bouts of retinal movement, the spider's hidden eyes scanning back and forth, following something. At the same time, the legs would curl and twitch in a pattern that resembled almost exactly the limb movements seen in dogs and cats and humans during REM sleep. She published the findings in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2022. Peer-reviewed, rigorous, and honest about what it means. Jumping spiders, she said, appear to experience something that looks very much like REM sleep, and the implication, she was careful with this, but she said it, is that they may be having visual dreams. That behind those tiny scanning invisible eyes, there is something being seen, something experienced, something that is from the inside, a dream. A spider, dreaming about what? About hunting, most likely about the precise gymnastic leaps they make in waking life. The world as seen through 8 eyes. About being a spider. The lead researcher said simply, I personally think they are dreaming. But being able to scientifically prove that is a whole different story. Zoom way out now and ask the question this whole conversation has been building toward why. Why do any of them dream? This is where the science gets genuinely profound, because sleep itself, especially REM sleep, is metabolically expensive. You're unconscious. You're vulnerable. You're burning energy with no obvious survival benefit. Evolution doesn't keep things around that don't pay for themselves. So whatever dreaming is doing, it must be doing something important. Something worth the cost of being completely defenseless for a third of your life. The leading theory is memory consolidation. The idea that sleep is when the brain takes the raw data of daily experience and converts it into long-term knowledge. That the hippocampus during sleep essentially compresses and archives everything that happened, making connections, strengthening important pathways, pruning the rest, the rat replaying the maze. Isn't just reminiscing, it's learning. It's building a better map for tomorrow. But there's a second theory that's just as compelling and darker: threat rehearsal. The idea that dreaming evolved partly as a way to practice responses to danger, to run simulations, to experience threats in a safe context. The body paralyzed, the mind running, so that when the real threat arrives, the response is faster, more effective, more automatic. The cat that dreams of hunting is practicing. The dog that twitches and barks in sleep is rehearsing the chase. The octopus that shoots ink at a dream predator is running a D-reel. Dreams as rehearsal. Dreams as preparation. Dreams as the brain's way of asking, what if and what would I do? And if that's what dreaming is, not just playback, but simulation, not just memory, but rehearsal, then the implications are enormous. Because it means animals aren't just replaying their lives during sleep, they're preparing for futures, they're imagining scenarios, and they're running versions of the world through their minds while the world waits outside. That's a kind of cognition we don't have a simple word for. It's more than memory, it's more than reflex. It's something that starts to look from the outside uncomfortably like what we'd call an inner life. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, because this is the part the feel-good versions of this story leave out. We don't actually know what animals experience during dreams. We know their brains are active. We know the activity resembles waking activity. We know they sometimes act out behaviors during sleep that correspond to waking behaviors. But the actual felt experience, what it's like that's locked away, inaccessible, maybe forever. There's a famous philosophical paper written in 1974 by Thomas Nagel called "What is it like to be a bat?" The point is simple. Bats experience the world through echolocation. We can know every single physical fact about bat neurons, bat brains, bat sonar, and still not know what it actually feels like to navigate a dark room through bouncing sound. Because subjective experience isn't reducible to physical description. Now, apply that to a zebra finch dreaming of a song it hasn't fully learned yet, or a rat running a maze it navigated 6 hours ago, or an octopus flashing camouflage patterns at something only IT can see. We can measure, we can correlate, we can map the brain activity and match it to waking behavior. But the actual experience, the felt quality of it, the redness of the dream red, the sound of the silent song that lives somewhere we cannot go. And I find that both deeply frustrating and in some way beautiful, because it means there are interiorities in this world. We share real ones, measurable ones, behaviorally demonstrable ones that we cannot fully access. We are surrounded by minds we cannot enter. Let's come back to something you can actually observe, because the science is important, but so is this. The next time your dog starts twitching in sleep, legs pumping, face scrunching, a soft sound escaping, the science says this. Brainstem structure that should be paralyzing those muscles isn't doing its job perfectly. The motor commands leaking through are directly correlated with brain activity. The brain at that moment is somewhere, it's doing something, it's in a scenario. Your dog is probably dreaming about its day, about a walk, about a smell that was particularly interesting this morning about you, quite possibly, because studies on dogs suggest that dogs' dreams tend to center on the things that matter most to them in waking life. And for most dogs, what matters most is their person, puppies, and kittens. It turns out dream more than adult animals. Significantly more, researchers believe this is because REM sleep plays a specific role in brain development in laying down the neural architecture that will last a lifetime. A young brain is building itself in the dream. Dreaming is part of how the brain learns to be a brain. Big dogs dream longer, but less frequently than small dogs. More complex brains take longer to consolidate, and animals deprived of REM sleep, prevented from dreaming through sleep disruption, show cognitive decline, emotional dysregulation, and physiological stress responses. The dream isn't optional. The dream is requited. Remove it, and something breaks. So let's bring this all the way home. Let's ask the question you actually want answered. Does my dog dream? Almost certainly yes. Does my cat dream? Almost certainly yes. Does the rat running a maze in a university lab dream? Yes, we can read the dream. Does the zebra finch on its perch dream? Yes, its throat moves with the song. Does an octopus dream? The evidence strongly suggests something that looks like it in something that looks like REM sleep, producing something that looks like visual experience. Does a jumping spider dream? A behavioral ecologist with a high-speed infrared camera watched its hidden eyes scan back and forth through its translucent skin at 3 in the morning and said probably, and what are they seeing, each of them in their own terms? The rat sees corridors and reward. The finch hears its song played back, slightly varied, slightly new. The octopus sees something in the dark that makes its skin flash and its body flinch. The spider sees whatever a spider's 8 eyes show it in some visual world that you and I simply cannot imagine. But that is the evidence now suggests genuinely being experienced. Somewhere inside that tiny pendant sleeping body, there is something it is like to be them. Even during sleep, even in the dark, even when the body is still and the world outside has gone quiet, something is happening, something is being seen. 2012, a group of prominent neuroscientists signed a document called the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness. Their conclusion was essentially this. The neural machinery required for conscious experience is not unique to humans. A wide range of animals, all mammals, all birds, and even some invertebrates possess the neurological architecture for conscious experience. Not probably, not maybe the hardware for consciousness is present across a vast range of animal life. That declaration was signed at a ceremony attended by Stephen Hawking. It received almost no news coverage, but it means something. It means that when scientists study a sleeping octopus and watch its colors ripple across the dark water, they are watching a mind at work. When they decode the neural firing of a sleeping rat and find a maze inside it, they are reading something that has every right to be called a dream. When a behavioral ecologist watches a spider's hidden eyes move behind translucent skin at 3 a.m., she is witnessing something that has been happening for hundreds of millions of years. Creatures so different from us that we barely have a framework for thinking about them, and that is so ordinary for them that they do it every single night. And we only just figured out it was happening. Animals dream. The rat, the finch, the octopus, the spider, your dog, your cat, all of them, in their own terms, in their own versions, seeing their own particular worlds when the lights go out. You share your nights with dreamers. more than you ever knew. And somewhere, right now, an octopus is sleeping at the bottom of the ocean, its skin rippling through colors in the dark, seeing something that has no name in any human language. Maybe that's the most remarkable thing of all.